Today's presentation is about why law firms don't like to hire attorneys from practice settings other than law firms. And this one of the things I wanted to say that I've been talking to some people that have been on these webinars and read a lot of articles and stuff. And it is people that participate in this sort of thing and listen to these webinars. It's a very helpful thing for you. It can make you a much more effective attorney. It can really help dramatically improve your career. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have people that are partners in major law firms really study this stuff that I've written and have had really good career. I hope that you continue to listen to this stuff and come to these webinars because it is very helpful. So today I'll be presenting this topic. Before I present this topic, I will open the floor to questions and take as many questions as everyone is interested in listening as anyone has. And I'll try to answer them in as much depth as I possibly can. And then after questions, we will finish. So that's about it. Okay, so let's get started. So this is about why law firms don't like attorneys from other practice settings other than law firms. And the reason this is an important topic is because if you are in a practice setting that's not a law firm and you want to go to a law firm, you need to understand what you're up against. The other thing, the reason this is an important topic is because if you do leave a law firm, it's very difficult to get back. You need to really understand this topic. And it's a good topic and something I think that every attorney really should know. So for the majority of law firms, especially the larger ones, most of them aren't going to be hiring attorneys coming from practice settings other than law firms. And there's some exceptions, but from a law firm standpoint, if they have to choose between hiring an attorney that's in a law firm and a practice setting other than a law firm, it's generally not going to hire an attorney from the different practice setting. It will prefer to hire the attorney from another law firm. And I've been trying for decades, for over 2 decades, to place attorneys from practice settings other than law firms in law firms because I make my living placing people into law firms. And it happens, and I certainly do it on an ongoing basis. Every several weeks I do, but it's very difficult and it is a rarity. It's like that for the most part. It's very difficult to get people from non-law firms into law firms. And of course, there's exceptions. I'm going to cover those. As I've said before, when a law firm is making any types of hiring decisions, it's asking 4 questions. And sometimes you could say there's 5 questions it's answering, but really there's 4 questions. And the first one is, can you do the job? The next one is whether or not you can be managed. The one after that is whether or not you can do the job long term. And then they're also asking themselves if you want the job. And there's really 2 types of categories of attorneys that may be coming from different practice settings. And the first is those who have already worked in a law firm and left. And then the second would be those who have never worked in a law firm. And I'm going to cover both of those today. So the first one is the attorney who has worked in a law firm and then taken a position in another practice setting. The big problem with attorneys that have taken jobs in other practice settings is many times they're going to assume that you did that because you had performance issues inside of a law firm. And it's not always performance issues, but they will suspect that may be the case. And they'll believe that you had issues with the law firm for whatever reason, wanted to be in a position where hours weren't important, so your performance might have been judged less harshly, or you were unhappy, so you took a job inside of a company where you wanted less oversight, more free time, all those sorts of things. And that's very common for attorneys to leave law firms to go into different practice settings where they have that option. And the thing about working in a law firm, when they're asking whether or not you can do the job, the problem with working in law firms, I think, is that you're judged based on how much time you're working. A law firm is going to require you to work a lot of hours and to be accountable for all your time. I mean, you have to write down all your time, regardless of what you're doing. Even if it's business development, people write it down. And so most attorneys that leave law firms and go to work in different practice settings, they do that because they simply do not like working the sorts of hours that law firms require. So if you leave a law firm and go to another practice setting, you do get more control over your time. It's very common in many companies and many law firms for people in many companies, non-legal settings for law firm settings for people to leave at 5 or 5:30. It's actually very common. There's a large software company over the hill close to where I live, and they're gone every day. It's empty at 5 or 5:30, and it's a huge company. They have general counsels and legal departments, and so it's very common in practice areas where you don't have, and outside of law firms, not to have to work the same kind of hours, and that's why a lot of people do it. And a law firm does mean crazy hours, and and a lot of accountability for your time. One of the funny things I remember when I was quitting the first law firm I worked at, and when I quit, I was just giving them all these reasons for quitting, which no one should ever do. The partner that I quit was said to me, I said something about that it was sad that another attorney hadn't made partner. It just seemed like a lot of that I would be investing a lot of my time in the place if there was for 5, 6 years or whatever it was at that point, I had to go. And he said, you have to remember the attorney made partner billed 3,200 hours and the one who didn't made only billed 2,800 hours. And I just thought that was completely insane that you would be judged based on just that few number of hours. So law firms require you to write down all your time. You have to be accountable. So people leave because of that. And that's part of doing the job, is being accountable for your time. And people don't like that. Even our own company, I've tried to, because I come out of a legal environment, I've tried to have people write down their time and send me their hours. And people hate doing it. And they may do it for a couple of days and then stop doing it because I want to get a sense of what they're working on. People just don't like being accountable for the time. And if that's what doing the job in a law firm means. The other thing that is important in terms of doing the job is when an attorney is coming from another law firm, there's always a presumption that they're doing specific work and a specific type of work. Regardless of how good the non-law firm practice setting is, most companies really have no idea of the type of legal work that's being done by most attorneys inside of companies. They know what the attorneys and law firms do because they see their work, but they don't necessarily know what's going on with attorneys outside of law firms in different practice settings. So it can vary. Major law firms typically, if you're working there, they require a certain type of work, and they know if you've been there a certain length of time that the work is going to be a certain quality, and they know all these things, but they don't know that if you're coming from a non-law firm employer. They don't know the caliber of work you've been doing, and a lot of times attorneys will pick up bad habits. Now, there are exceptions to this, of course. The U.S. Attorney's Office has certain companies, their patent departments, there's lots of exceptions, but this is a general rule. Another thing is that you need to remember is that to get work in a law firm, an attorney needs to do work that's acceptable to people giving them work, whether it's outside clients or the law firms. Outside clients, if you don't do a good job for them, they fire you. And if you're doing work for big clients, they will expect very high quality work. And if you're working at a really good firm, they know that the firm's going to expect really high quality work. And so all these people are that you're working for are constantly going to be measuring your performance in a large law firm, and they're going to have certain expectations. And a lot of times, if you're working in another practice setting, the law firm really has no idea whatsoever about the quality of work you're doing. And so that kind of spooks them a little bit and is something that many times will create issues in terms of them hiring you, and especially if they know the actual attorneys you may be working for. And the other thing is that it's important is you need to realize that lawyers really don't walk around with ratings given them by their former employers. There's certainly rankings out there and things like Law Dragon and Chambers, I think Law Dragon's the one that ranks actual attorneys. There's rankings of best attorneys lists and so forth, which are good rankings of attorneys and show who's a good attorney. But for the most part, most attorneys are not on those lists. And so the only way that a law firm has of knowing the quality of the work you do is based on the type of legal environment and law firm you're working at and how good those particular attorneys are in that legal environment. So different, obviously working at a major AmLaw 100 law firm and with the most prestigious attorneys and staying there for a length of time shows that you're a good attorney. There's nothing else besides that most law firms even need to know. So that's one of the reasons that's really helpful. And the big thing is that when attorneys typically go in-house or to another practice setting, their legal skills deteriorate. A law firm needs to consistently turn out very good work and is always making sure that things are well-proofed, look good, that the logic's good, and that the client there's no malpractice and so forth. And they're just very careful. And there's a lot of people that tend to be involved. And other practice settings, law firms just don't have that. They They don't know that in different in-house. So many in-house companies have extremely sophisticated legal departments, but for the most part, the most sophisticated work done by in-house legal departments is farmed out to law firms. And in-house attorneys are often giving that work out to others. So that's just something to understand. Another thing that's when you talk about doing the job inside of a law firm is that it requires you to develop your own business. That's a completely different model than in different practice settings. As an attorney gets more senior in a law firm, they're expected to develop their own business. In almost every law firm, this is considered the job and part of the job in advancing. And if an attorney can't develop business as they get more senior, they can't do the job. And that's one of the big things is when you're in a law firm and you stay there for a length of time, you're making contacts, you're out there hustling for work, you're doing the things, you're watching other attorneys and how they get business. And so that's a skill that law firms value. Now, it's not something that all law firms require. There are law firms where you can, become a partner and be very successful without any business because of the fact that the law firm may have institutional clients and there's work for you to do and so forth, but that's not generally the case. So, and law firms know that people typically will leave and go to other practice settings when they get more senior because they don't have really the ability to develop work on their own. So that means they may not have the networking abilities. They may not be getting referred work from clients and referrals and so forth. They may not be liked or respected enough by other attorneys in the legal community to get work, or they just don't have that special sauce needed to generate work. And there really isn't a special sauce. Anyone can generate work, and I think I would be happy, if I haven't done it already, I should give a presentation on how to get business, and it doesn't matter who you are, any attorney can, but it's just, those are reasons that a lot of times attorneys will leave firms. And so that means if you leave, you're not in a position to do that. So you may not be able to do the job. The other thing about doing the job inside a law firm means you just need to be interested and willing to work with lots of different clients. Many attorneys that go in-house to the government or public interest organizations do so because they're only interested in working for one type of client and whose mission that they really believe in. So that's important to think about. You want to be, as a law firm attorney, you have to take many different stance on things. You can maybe doing plaintiff's work one day, defense work the other. And a lot of times attorneys don't want to work in a law firm because they want to be one client's advocate and they don't want to have to represent people with different kind of points of view about different things that they may not believe in. And many clients leave law firms because they don't like the type of clients that the law firms have. So that's important to do as well, to think about. Another thing that's very difficult about working in a law firm, and that a reason a lot of people leave, can't do the job, is because working in a law firm means you have to be able to tolerate a lot of uncertainty regarding advancement, keeping your advancement and remaining with the firms. I was on a webinar not too long ago, and someone said to me something that I thought about. They said, "You seem like you've been a great lawyer. Why did you leave a law firm?" And I thought about that because actually I did enjoy practicing law. And even when I got out not too long ago, I was, realized I was, good at it because I did some anyway, and enjoyed it. But the point is, I gave it some thought, and my answer was very straightforward. When I was younger, I was just terrified of the uncertainty, the difference between working 2,800 and 3,200 hours and making partner and maybe having to leave a firm. It's just that the uncertainty was something that scared me a lot. I saw partners losing their jobs. I saw people not making partner that I thought should make partner. I saw people advance for political reasons to become partners in big firms that probably shouldn't have been. I saw associates get better cases because they were friends, others not have any work. And it just seemed very uncertain and frightening to me. And the thing is that's actually probably not a good reason to leave. If you're really good at what you do and you're confident and you put your head down and work, most of the time people that do that have confidence in themselves, do well. But from my standpoint, that just wasn't what I was doing or with the way I thought when I was younger. So I decided I didn't like the uncertainty and wanted to do something. And this is something that lots and lots of senior associates and others inside of law firms do. They lose, they can't tolerate the uncertainty. And just many people do that. And so they choose a different practice setting because of that. And law firms know that attorneys who leave them probably will leave again when they don't like the uncertainty as well. Let me just see here. And yeah, one other thing too that I think is important, that there's not just the idea of uncertainty, but you have to understand that there's lots of uncertainty because there's ups and downs inside of law firms. There's a lot, many times law firms will just let fire people if work slows down. Whole groups of attorneys lose their jobs in major firms all the time, which is just completely devastating. A lawyer could I've seen attorneys bill 3,000 hours a year for several years in a row, and then all of a sudden a major case settles and they're essentially out on the street unemployed after 10 years in a law firm. But this is just how it works. And partners can lose their status as equity partners, and people could be advanced or not advanced with little explanation. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty in working in a law firm, and it can be scary, but honestly, there's uncertainty everywhere. Maybe not so much in certain government roles and so forth. Anytime you go into an environment where there's uncertainty, you're often compensated in relation to the amount of security versus insecurity. And that's one thing that kind of how law firms work. In addition, when you work in a law firm, you're always going to be part of an extremely competitive environment. Most legal environments, they're very competitive. Attorneys will compete for work, they'll compete for clients, hours, recognition, and there's just all sorts of political games that are played. People undermine each other, and it depends on the law firm, but a lot of times people will leave because they can't tolerate it. And many times law firms know that if you left, you may have left because of that. They believe that you may be unhappy for that again, and the past will repeat itself. So that's another reason why they consider people from other environments may not be able to do the job. And then also in a law firm, there can be a lot of social components that people will leave because if those aren't met. One might be to be expected to socialize with clients and other attorneys, often weekly. Some law firms, require you to go out with clients practically, or potential clients on pitches, or just existing clients practically weekly. You may have to socialize with other attorneys outside of work in order to get work from them. Many attorneys just don't want to be part of this. I know one woman that's a very talented associate in Los Angeles, and she's I don't know, been 15 years out of law school, and she hasn't advanced to counsel or anything because she keeps her work in her life, and she just doesn't kiss up to the right people and doesn't go out and socialize after work with clients and so forth. She just leaves at the end of the day, and there's a penalty and a price to pay for that. So you have to socialize in most law firms to get ahead, whereas inside of a company, you may not have to as much, depending on the company or the government as well. Another thing inside of a law firm that's important is doing the job requires always being available, including on weekends and holidays. In many companies or other government things, you go home and that's it. But many law firms will require their attorneys to work on the weekends and holidays and pretty much be ready to come into the office time or do the work at home. And lots of attorneys leave because they're unable to control their schedule, and it can be very stressful. It's actually extremely stressful. For me, from what I remember, you really have no downtime, and there's just always deadlines and things every day of the week practically sometimes. So you need to be really on top of that, and that's just can be very stressful. And the other thing is just travel. You may have to travel. That's something that law firms you may have to do that people don't like, and reasons they leave. And then many times you have to do work that's beneath you. That's also terrible. Many times you may have to do work that you think is demeaning or beneath you, or you may be required to do work you just don't always want to do, but this is part of the job. And turning down an assignment can often be fatal to working with someone. Again, I was working with an attorney at a major San Francisco law firm that had always gotten perfect reviews, and then they were talking about her being partner. Apparently she'd turned down an assignment at some point, and a couple years earlier, and then they said that was like a big black mark on her records. It's just you have to always be willing to do work no matter what, and that's an important thing. So those 10 things really are major reasons that law firms many times think you can't do the job. But another thing that's really important is they also will assume many times you can't be managed if you left the law firm environment to go to another practice setting. So that's another reason they get nervous about it. And this simply means that you're not going to complain or create issues. In every law firm, there's people that kind of support the law firm and are, cheerleaders for the law firm, and others that may be against it or indifferent. And the law firms want to keep people around that are happy and support the firm. If attorney doesn't seem all in, with the firm and what they want, they're going to be very difficult to manage. Attorneys often will leave law firms and go to other environments because of the things I talked about above, but they also may have conflicts with other attorneys or their hours or other management issues. And if any attorney is seen as undermining the law firm or creating issues, they're just difficult to manage. And many people will leave the law firm practice setting that are having a hard time with law firms. And there are plenty of attorneys. And when I say plenty, I would say 50% or more that have issues with working in law firms and just don't like their jobs. And there's the 50% that actually really like it. And so they're trying to keep those people around. But if you leave a law firm, and even partners in major, very successful firms many times don't like their job. But if a law firm keeps people around that are negative and so forth and can't be managed, it's going to hurt them. And the law firm knows that if you left, the odds are that you were probably someone that was down on working in a law firm for whatever reason. And most attorneys will disqualify themselves during interviews when they'll say things, FaceTime was essential, and I didn't understand why it mattered where I did the work, so they left a law firm because of that reason. Sometimes they'll say things like, I was doing a lot of work for different clients, and I wanted to put all my energy into one client. Many times they'll say, this is a very common one, about a crazy boss, and it wasn't a good relationship. So they'll say that, and it's really the attorney's responsibility to do the work that's asked of them in order to find someone new to work with. And so leaving the practice setting because of a bad boss isn't necessarily a good thing. And it's a reason that law firms many times won't bring people back. They'll also say things like they didn't make partner, and therefore they didn't see a future working in a law firm. They'll say they got burned out. They may say that it was competitive. And all these things are just, or the morale was low, are just symptoms of what a law firm is like. If you talk negatively about the reasons you left a law firm, then law firms almost always are going to assume that you can't work in another law firm. And so these things that I've just mentioned, getting burned out or the competition or all these things are things that attorneys say all the time. And when they do get interviews in practice settings that aren't, from practice settings that aren't law firms, in law firms, people will say things about a lot of travel being involved. They'll say the law firm was very social and they had to spend a lot of time with attorneys outside of work. They'll say they were frustrated because they were dealing with a boss who was a micromanager. Just the problem with a law firm is most law firms, especially the good ones, have a huge amount of people that can hire from and for most jobs. And so they're very eager to bring in the right people. And if you're interviewing with them and they want to, and they're interested in you, if you say things that show that you might be hard to manage, it's going to be difficult. They'll also say things about it disorganized, and so they left for a different practice setting. They may say stuff about busy work or not getting the right experience. On all these things, you're expected to fix those where you're at if possible, and leaving the law firm environment is not necessarily the right decision, and that's how the law firms think about it. Everybody is unhappy in certain aspects of a job. But the idea is that if you were unhappy before, you're talking about things about a law firm that typically won't change. And if you have morale issues and so forth, or different things that you didn't like about a law firm job, the odds are that those are going to repeat itself at the new place. A good employer will hire people, a good law firm employer will hire people that they know will buy in. And the worst thing that can happen is someone will quit and say, you promised me that there would be no travel, or you promised me it wasn't competitive, or you promised me, or you said it wasn't going to be like this. Because if someone comes in with those sort of expectations after being in another environment, the odds are they're going to leave. And anytime you set yourself up with those sort of expectations and you're coming from another practice setting, the law firm, if they know what they're doing, will typically avoid you because the odds are you're going to leave, or you're going to be very difficult for them to manage. And the idea is law firms, just the idea of leaving to go to a practice setting, the law firm will assume you're just not going to stick around. A law firm is a business, and so they have to hire people. Hiring's a lot of work. They have to interview you. They have to talk to you. They have to introduce you to people in the firm, and it costs money to get you up to speed with their clients, and it's bad for morale when people leave. And law firms need to hire people that are likely to stick around. And if you think about it just from a business standpoint, if you're coming from another practice setting, the odds are pretty good that you're not going to stick around. And most of the time, attorneys don't. When they're gone to another practice and they come back. Almost always they leave. I've very rarely seen someone stay very long. Almost all of them will leave. The reason is because once you get outside of a law firm environment and you start working in another type of employer, what you're going to realize, or what if you're on the position, is that you're not going to have to most often deal with the same sort of stresses that exist in a law firm that I discussed earlier. You're not going to have to deal with writing down your hours and the severe competition and the advancement and the uncertainty. And people will get comfortable in another practice setting and they'll want to find that comfort again. The idea of most other practice settings, though, is that they're not efficient at managing lawyers. Most of them aren't. Law firms, though, are efficient at managing lawyers and work product, whereas other practice settings typically aren't. So that's just something to think about. You're looking for many times an inefficient environment where you're not going to have to be as accountable. You will have to be accountable in a law firm, and that's the problem. And so once people come back, they start planning their escape once again. The thing is that's interesting is when a couple breaks up and tries to get back together after a long absence, after being apart for a long time, that rarely works out. There are things that they may have missed with each other while they were apart. But when they get back together, all the same things that made the relationship not work in the past will come up again. The same things that annoyed them are going to annoy them. And so they start plotting their next escape. And they may also be angry about the past breakup and lack of trust and so forth. And the same issues remain. So it usually doesn't work the second time either. Certainly there's acceptance to that, but generally it doesn't. One of my mentors once told me, it was very interesting. He said, never rehire anyone. And despite his advice, I actually did this numerous times. And one thing I'll tell you is that every single person that I ever rehired again and left again, and not only that, but they did the company a lot of harm because they were continually unhappy. They undermined people. In one case, one person left and then stole a bunch of my employees. It's just, they all left again in short order. So if somebody leaves once, they're going to leave again, and you just need to stop it. And so the employers that are seeing you come from another practice setting that you left and gone to a different practice setting and want to come back to a law firm, if they're smart, they're going to many times avoid you. And most attorneys who leave law firms for other practice settings just will leave again. It's the same thing. They left because they resented the demands of the time, whatever it was, they're going to leave again. And that's something you need to be aware of. So that's that. So it's something to think about. And it's very important, too, that when attorneys are going back to law firms many times from other practice settings, they'll say they can bring in their own business, or they're going to be able to do that the next time. And many times, most of the time, that doesn't happen as well. So working in a law firm is about all these things. It's about developing business. It's about willing to work on many different types of clients. It's about doing the caliber and the amount of work that's required. And these are all things that a law firm requires that people will many times leave because they're not being able to do that in another practice setting. And the uncertainty and being in a competitive environment. All these things are present when you've left a law firm and when you go back to a law firm. Socializing, being available on weekends and holidays, all these things. And so these are some of the reasons that people will tend to leave again. And pretty much every time I've seen someone leave, they end up leaving again when they go to another practice setting. It's the travel, and then it's doing kind of busy work or work that's no fun as well. Okay, so the third thing, then there's one more and then we're done, is law firms will often assume that you won't stick around if you left a law firm to go to a different practice setting and want to come back. There's nothing to say that someone who doesn't like these things can't be managed and so forth, but many people who leave just won't ever come back again, or will leave again. Because if somebody left the law firm before, they're probably going to leave again. And because of these limits and so forth, that they'll not want to do all the things that law firms require. And the other thing is they're going to assume you probably don't want the job. That's what I would say one of the most important things is, because lawyers, I've seen many times, I've been contacted by attorneys all the time, and including friends of mine and other people. And a lot of times they'll say things like, I can convince them that I want to work there, or that I'll be a good employee. And they basically do that because they want to make money, and they're not When salaries always go up and then the salaries stay lower in in-house or other environments, people start thinking maybe I should go back and try to make more money, or they need a job and they want to go back to a law firm. And candidates will say all sorts of things to try to convince people that they want the job, and they'll really act like they do. But the idea is that law firms are working in a law firm is unique. It's its own, as I've told you in this presentation, it's a very unique thing. If an attorney wants to come back to that, the odds are pretty good, or if they try to convince an employer, that the employer is not going to believe them. If you went into public interest, academia or government, for example, the goals of public interest organizations are completely at odds with the type of work that a law firm does. It just doesn't, they're just not the same. And people that are that passionate about certain ideas and have left are probably not going to want to work in a law firm. The same thing with academia. Academia is not the same sort of thinking. It's not as crisp, it's not as direct, it's more theoretical, and it's not the sort of stuff that typically will convince courts of ideas, or the sort of work that is done in corporate departments or anything else. Government positions can be incredibly slow paced. I know people that work in the armed services and different government organizations, and some of them tell me they don't work more than 2 hours a day. A lot of it is just making up reports and trying to look like you're doing a good job. There are some incredibly slow-paced government positions. Now, many U.S. attorneys' offices and so forth are in clerkships, and other government positions are very, and FDA and other things can be very good, but there's some that aren't that good. And the idea is, if you've gone to work in something other than a law firm, law firms really do believe that, especially in some of these other practice settings, that you're just not going to want to expose yourself to all this kind of stress of a law firm again. But because of the salaries, many attorneys will often try to come back and work in law firms again. And many times I'll point out to attorneys that they don't look like they want to look in a law firm. Nothing about their resume, their current resume, makes it look like they want to work in a law firm. And they'll say, I can fool them and I'll convince them I'm interested in this. And generally, law firms are much too smart for this. Your interest reflected and where you should be at is reflected based on the choices that you've made. Now, I'm not saying that if you couldn't get a job in a law firm or you didn't know what you're doing in your search, that there were reasons for that. But at the same time, you need to make sure that you need to do your best to really convince someone that you want to work there. Okay. So the final thing we're going to cover today is the attorney who's never worked in a law firm, only worked in another practice setting, and trying to get the ability of those attorneys to get positions with law firms. So I've already covered people that have left the practice setting, and this is just for you if you've never worked in there. And this is a much faster part of the presentation, but I will cover it real briefly. If you've never worked in a law firm, the law firm has absolutely no idea whether or not you can do the job, whether or not you can be managed, whether or not you do the job long term, or whether or not you really want the job. And those four things are very important. And they just have no idea if you can do the job in most cases if you're coming from another practice setting. Now, a federal clerkship and some other things are certain government offices and certain in-house companies there are exceptions, but in reality, a law firm just has no idea what your training has been like in another organization, whether it's government, public interest, in-house. The standards are different, and just not the case with law firms. There's a pecking order between law firms. They, as I said earlier, they have a good understanding of the types of attorneys and the quality of attorneys coming from other law firms, and they just don't have that same other understanding when people are coming from different practice settings. And the other problem is that, especially if you've never worked in another law firm, is law firms will often assume that you're just not qualified to work there. The problem is it's very difficult for law students and new attorneys to get positions in law firms compared to some other practice settings. So if you didn't get a job in a law firm during the summer, for example, they will wonder why you weren't working in a law firm during the summer. They will be concerned about that. If they know that, well, in most new attorneys coming out of law school and so forth typically do not turn down, or very rarely will not turn down an offer from a large law firm because of the salary, the potential to save a lot of money early in your life, or the potential to pay off loans and so forth. They know that very few people will not do that. And if you weren't able to get a job, they will suspect, or if you didn't do it, they will suspect that you may have bad grades or a bad interview or personal problems, or just didn't want to do it. But the main thing is they'll assume you probably couldn't get the job and therefore can't do the job. If you were a summer associate in a big firm and you got an offer, they will assume that you can do the job. But if you don't have any meaningful law firm experience, they have no idea whether or not you'll be able to meet the demands of a law firm, which are billing a certain number of hours, doing the work quality of work, working for multiple partners, socializing, being able to relate to clients, doing the quality of work, which is a big one. Law firms tend to have very high quality work compared to many other legal environments. Being trustworthy, doing what you say you're going to do, being able to work the right number of hours, come up with solutions to client problems, and developing at the same, pace as your peers. The problem is what happens in law firms is law firms, when young attorneys go there, regardless of what law firm it is or what part of the country it's in, whether or not they're a summer associate or a first year, there's certain people, and I don't know what it is, but there's probably, in my experience, I would say, at least in the law firms I worked at, maybe between 10 and 15% of the people were just completely incompatible with working in a law firm. Like they had no business being there. And some of those people get flushed out during the summer associates, and other people, that happens even after they've been a summer associate and they join. They're just not the right sort of people. And so if you've been through all of that and you've worked at a law firm for a year, 2 years, 3 years, the law firm knows you're the right person. But if you haven't been through that experience, the law firm's taking a risk that you may be one of those 15% or more of the people that just are completely incompatible with the law firm. So that's part of the problem. And then rather than take the risk, many just won't hire. So I see attorneys with no law firm experience who join law firms all the time, and many fail. I would say a much higher percentage of them fail than people that are joining laterally from law firms. They may not have the training, they may not have learned the work habits, they may have been able to rise to the expectations of the law firms. And rather than risk this, many law firms just won't hire them. That's how it works. They don't want to get into it, and they don't want to risk it. It's too bad for morale. There's just all sorts of issues, but it takes partners time trying to bring them up to speed. That's not necessary. Just so many problems. And so there's no reason for them to do it. The other thing that's important is if you're coming from another practice setting, a law firm really doesn't have any idea of whether or not you'll be managed. And the best way really to tell if an attorney is manageable by another law firm is how long they've remained with their previous employer, if that employer is a law firm. So if you were at a very prestigious law firm or a good law firm or a well-regarded law firm in your city or market for a certain length of time, the law firm knows you're going to be manageable. But if a law firm hires an attorney that has never worked in a law firm, it's not going to know if it's manageable or anything about its performance, such as how the person will take orders. There's certain people that just are very bad at taking orders. They don't follow instructions, or they hear what they want to hear, or it's just what it is. And then you have to be able to take criticism. Many law firms are exceptionally critical of people's work. I remember when I was at this one law firm, there was this partner, and he'd been trained at his previous firm, he'd worked at a huge LA firm, and he would, with all the first year associates, and thankfully I didn't work there as a first year associate, I had lateral with the firm, but with all the first year associates, he had this thing where he would intentionally come in and try to make them cry. I'm not saying that he was intentionally doing it, but almost everybody he would talk to, his first years, would cry. He would come in and he would close the door. The critique would be just harsh about their work and everything that they were doing. And he was doing that to get them to improve and to be exceptional. I think he was breaking their spirit personally, but that was his training method. And so you have to be able to tolerate that in a law firm. Very few people, that's not something that a lot of people can tolerate, or attorneys learn to take that kind of criticism and incorporate and get better, but not many people do. In other practice settings, or people that aren't attorneys many times have a very difficult time with that type of feedback, and you have to learn that. And that type of feedback is generally given in the most prestigious law firms to the most talented attorneys oftentimes, because the law firm wants them to improve. The law firm doesn't know if you're a team player or someone likely to make trouble. There's always going to be people that a law firm will hire that could be negative, or if the person doesn't do good work, or there's problems with their work, they may become negative, or they may just not like the law firm. So the law firm doesn't know that. The law firm doesn't know if you're coming from a practice setting that is demanding of your time. The law firm won't know if you're willing to put the face time required. do that. The law firm won't know if you're willing to work with a wide variety of people if you're used to working with one people. So most law firms are very predictable. And if you don't have law firm experience, the law firm's going to be suspicious and worried you can't be managed. The other thing is law firms also, if you've never been in a law firm, they don't have any idea whether or not you're going to be willing to do the work long term. And the only way to really tell if someone is going to thrive or remain in a law firm is that they've already done it. Many attorneys work in law firms and immediately reject them and start looking for options just as soon as they start. Some people just instinctively react that way to law firms. I was amazed. I was working at a New York law firm in Los Angeles, but then I went out to the New York office, and the firm's no longer in existence. It was called Dewey Ballantyne. But I went out to visit some of we went out for Christmas party or something, and for all the new associates, there was a big event, and I met all these over a week. There was this indoctrination event, but almost everybody I met was already talking as a first-year associate about how they wanted to leave the law firm and how soon they were going to leave and get this in-house job. And many people just automatically are looking for something else when they start. And I was like that. I literally was looking, before I'd been practicing more than 3 months in a law firm after doing a clerkship, but I was looking at options about alternative legal careers. And it's just a major risk for law firms to hire someone who's never worked at a law firm, because they don't know if they're going to last, if they're going to reject the law firm environment. The final thing is that they may believe if you're not working in a law firm, they may not want the job. If the only jobs you've ever had have been in non-law firms, most law firms are going to believe that this is because you don't want to work in a law firm to begin with. I speak with law firms, attorneys all the time who've taken positions doing public interest work in prosecutor's office and law professors, and who want to work in law firms now. And the problem is, once you've gone in a different path, you've effectively demonstrated this is where your interest lies, and law firms are most likely to be interested in you. I see this a lot from graduates of sometimes a lot of people from Harvard and Stanford and Yale and things like that. Like, they'll take these jobs in public interest organizations or in working inside of academia and things, and then they'll come to me and they want to get a job in a law firm, and you have to look at it from the law firm standpoint. If the person's already done something else like that, the odds are they're probably not going to stay. And law firms want to hire people that really want the position. The final thing I would say is that the only exception of this kind of rule is, and there are exceptions, and these are important exceptions. So if anything I've said to you so far has depressed you about getting a job in another law firm, then this should hopefully take care of that. But the only exceptions really are for clerks, some prosecutors, and attorneys in niche practice areas. I place attorneys all the time from coming out of different practice settings. And when I say all the time, very often, multiple times, usually per month. So it's not like everything I'm saying is written in stone, because it's not. If you did a clerkship, like for a judge right after law school, you can generally get a position. Your odds are dramatically increased. And this is through me as a recruiter. And most clerks can get positions with a law firm. But the odds are increased dramatically for a summer associate with a law firm. So if you've been a summer associate, then it's very easy for the most part and then you did a clerkship to come back and you get a job with a law firm, because it shows that's where you wanted to work. It's even easier if you got an offer. If you did a federal district court or an appellate clerkship, that's very marketable. State Supreme Courts are marketable. Even local courts are marketable if you want to work in that area. And after a few years, typically you don't want to do a clerkship for more than 2 years, because then it starts looking like you might want to be a career clerk, which actually is a pretty good job. But if you clerk longer than 2 years, it's going to make it look like you're no longer interested in working in a law firm. Law firms typically would like to see your clerkship limited to no more than 2 years. If you're in a niche practice area, you're very marketable many times, even if you don't have any law firm experience. So those niche practice areas, the main one is patent prosecution. Most law firms will hire patent prosecutors coming out of non-law firm environments. Now, the larger ones tend to be a little bit more competitive to get jobs with, but smaller firms definitely will hire patent prosecutors coming out of non-traditional environments that have never worked in a law firm. Other practice areas where I've had lots of luck placing people, even recently, are healthcare, executive compensation. Healthcare, they hire people from hospitals, from the government, from executive compensation, many times from accounting firms, very often even the largest firms, or ERISA. food and drug from the FDA, sometimes pharmaceutical companies. All those are marketable without law firm experience. And there's other niche practice areas too. Even any practice area you can think of, the more niche it is, the better. Even some forms of corporate work and other things. If you're in a niche practice area and then difficult for the firm to find people like you as a general rule, then you will be marketable. So you just have to think about how many attorneys are there like me in the market. And if there's not a lot like you with your experience, then you're very marketable, because law firms, how else are they going to get someone like you? And then you have to think about geography. If you're in a certain geography and where there's a lot of people like you, what about in other geographies? So one of the great markets right now for me has been Ohio. I think it's a great market. There's a lot of opportunity there, and not a lot of people are interested in Ohio for whatever reason. I think it's a great state, but because I'm from the Midwest, but relatives in Ohio, but I always enjoy myself there, except it gets cold, but even then it's nice. But anyway, but there are certain markets where people are much more marketable than others. So that's something to think about. There's also exceptions in other practice areas when the attorney's experience might be very niche, when there's high demand in the economy. And when corporate is very busy, law firms may welcome people back in from in-house as long as they haven't been there too long. It's not, that common. It's actually a little bit difficult, even when the economy's good, because they do assume you'll leave again. But it happens. I've placed numerous corporate attorneys in-house in law firms, from in-house in law firms. And then I've also seen law firms hire people from their client. Almost every major prestigious law firm out there that you can think of, if you take the top 10 most prestigious law firms, a good portion of them, I've seen the law firms hire people from them. And it doesn't happen a lot, but if you're in-house and you're working for a law firm and the law firm is amazed by your skills and so forth, and then you approach the firm, that can happen too. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens. And then the other thing is when you're with the government, former prosecutors, government appointees, and elected officials, law firms are more than happy to hire former prosecutors. They get hired all the time in the most prestigious firms, advanced to partners, and some of the best attorneys in the country are former prosecutors and actually never worked in law firms until they took a law firm job. Government appointees and elected officials, former judges are hired all the time, former assistant U.S. attorneys, other high-ranking state and government officials can always find positions with the government with law firms after completing public service. None of that is really too difficult. Anyway, so that's the conclusions. That's the presentation. If you're interested in working for a law firm, though, the best thing really is never to leave. And if you do want to go back, making sure that your experience is as niche as possible. One thing, you just need to be very careful and hopefully follow advice. So I'm going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, I will answer all the questions you have. You can ask questions about the presentation or anything to do with your career. I'm more than happy to answer it. And then if you have follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer those. As many questions as you guys have today, and I'm happy to answer them all. And I will be back in 1 minute. Okay, let's get started on the questions. And just so you guys know, all the questions are anonymous, so you can ask pretty much whatever you want. I can't see your name or anything like that. So I'm just trying to let you guys know that. But any questions anyone has, happy to answer, and I'll start answering them right now. So the first question is, hi, Harrison, I came across your article about the dark side of going in-house, and I found it very interesting. I'm an in-house lawyer working at a glass packaging producer, the fourth biggest in the world, and have started the role about 4 years ago. I was previously a corporate associate at a very prestigious firm in Portugal. I realized from quite early on when I changed to in-house that I would end up going back to a law firm again. I decided to stay year after year for these past 3 years because I've been given great opportunities that I do not see myself having a law firm. However, last year I decided it was time to go back to a law firm, and I'm feeling all the difficulties you listed in your article. And it is actually very frustrating, as I know that I'm far more qualified technically and commercially than many lawyers I know working in law firms. I'm trying to keep my hopes up and have considered other possibilities, including working abroad. Can you give me advice? Yeah, so my advice would be, it's going to be very difficult for you to get back into a law firm because you've shown that you're interested in another practice setting, and then you committed to that practice setting, and their perception is that they don't know anything about your skills, and they will assume that they have deteriorated and that you're pushing the most complex work and so forth out to law firms and not doing it yourself. And so they're going to have all the doubts I've covered in this presentation, which will be that you may not have been able to do the job, that you may want not stay, that you may not want to be managed, all those sorts of things. So my advice really, there's a couple pieces of advice. The first one is to try to see if the people that you're giving work to, the outside law firms, would be willing to work with you and hire you. And there's a possibility that they might. You should see what you can do with that. And if you've done very impressive work for them and they see you as a very hard worker and someone who works much harder than you need to and does work that's much more thorough than you need to, then the odds are fairly good that they may be interested in you. Now, barring that, if you can't get a job doing that, I would contact the law firm where you were a corporate associate in Portugal and see if you can work for them. And then I would also potentially see if there's other law firms in Portugal that might be interested. You haven't said anything about whether or not you're working in the United States or anything along those lines, so I don't know, but I would try to contact other law firms. And then the biggest piece of advice I can give anyone that's coming from another practice setting, anybody that has anything in their background that makes it difficult for you to get a job, whether it's where you went to law school or your experience or a period of unemployment or whatever it is, all it means is you just can't start as high on the food chain as you normally would. So it just means you can't start at typically the highest, the most prestigious law firms with the most options and the most people that they can hire are typically going to gravitate away from you. And they will be more likely to gravitate towards attorneys that don't have these things in their background. So just as you go down, you start looking at smaller law firms, you're going to have more opportunities. You start looking at smaller law firms and also smaller markets, you're going to have more opportunities. So you just have to move down the food chain. None of this means you can't get a job. It just means where you get a position ultimately is going to be with the type of firm that you may not want to end up with in your career. Some of the most successful attorneys that I know started out at very small law firms. And that happened to them because in one case, I know someone that she failed the bar a bunch of times, but then she ended up becoming a partner in a major law firm. I know someone else that just all sorts of different types of people end up but you have to start sometimes small. So I hope that helps. Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's see. I'm just inserting some of these questions. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so there's another question that's very similar. It says, how can a candidate overcome these assumptions? I've spent a lot of time in-house, but I want to go back to a firm despite all the drawbacks you just discussed. I think the main thing is you have to convince the law firms that you can be managed, that you do want the job, that you can do the work and all those sorts of things. And so those four things that I brought up are important. You have to be, all in and really make the law firm believe these things. And if the law firm does believe those, then they're going to hire you. But my main piece of advice is just that you start as high as you possibly can in the food chain, and then you move down because eventually someone will bite. Whether or not it's a solo practitioner, you have to go all that way, or you have to go higher up, you have something to offer. And whatever your skills are, you need to find people that are selling that skill in the market, and then you need to market yourself to them. You need to market yourself to them with the understanding that you can help them. The nice thing now, too, is there's a lot of these jobs that are remote. The biggest thing you can do is, my biggest piece of advice would be, if you're working in-house, if you have a way to make yourself look like a niche candidate, then do that. And if not, then if you're more of a generalist, then start marketing yourself to smaller firms and larger firms. And if you're geographically flexible, then I would recommend doing whatever you can to look at smaller markets and multiple markets as well. Everybody gets a job, by the way, in a law firm that wants one. There's so many law firms and attorneys out there. Anybody that wants to work in a law firm can get one. The question is, you just need to be able to find the right law firm and go from there. It may be a smaller one. And the idea is that the larger law firms have the ability to pick people and to get people that don't have anything that looks at all negative in their background, whereas the smaller law firms do not necessarily have that, and they don't have as many people that want to work there. So you need to probably start there sometimes. Thanks. Okay, let's see. How will being downsized from my law firm due to COVID-19's effect on the firm's financial position affect my ability to find work in the current environment? Okay, that's a great question. So one thing that I've seen, and I've been working with a lot of people that have lost their jobs, is I'm not seeing like the law firms having really as many issues as they typically did in the past. Like previous recessions in like 2000, 2001, then 2008. Typically what had happened in those is people that were laid off did have a very difficult time finding a position because law firms, when you're laid off, typically a law firm assumes that the law firm won't lay off everyone. It'll keep its most valuable people. If you were laid off, it's a statement about how bad your work was or something, or that you weren't able to get along with people, and or you were negative, or who knows. But that's typically been the perception. And then law firms want to hire people that are employed because the perception sometimes is if you're unemployed, you'll have sour grapes, be difficult wherever you go. Now, that's a good question with COVID-19, because what's happened I've seen that the law firms, whether it's a big law firm or law firms, don't seem to really care as much. And whereas they did in the past, I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because it's different. I don't know. Or maybe because the layoffs are more widespread. But I don't think it really is going to affect your work too dramatically right now. I don't think you have as much to worry about as you may think, because I've seen almost substantial number of my candidates that I'm working with that were laid off are getting interviews, whereas people that weren't before, law firms literally would say, don't send us unemployed people, don't blah, blah, blah. Where now they're interviewing the same people. So I don't think it's that bad. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a different time, but that's a good thing. And if anybody has any follow-up questions to this stuff, you're welcome to answer them. And I would be happy to ask them, and I'd love to answer them as well. Okay. A law student having prior degrees from LSE, the University of London, and Rice University. I'm seeking to transition to the U.S. legal markets. Do you guys handle law students right out of law school? No, we don't do work with law students, but I would recommend reviewing jobs on Law Crossing if you are interested in a law student interested in jobs. Typically, recruiters and people in the placement industry can only work with an attorney that has at least 1 year of experience. And the reason for that is because law firms typically will hire us to find people that can step into roles that are already trained and have the work and have the abilities to do the work. I'm a senior associate at a global law firm based in Australia. I have benefited from reading your perspectives and would love to speak with you about some career advice. Do you provide coaching service? If not, would you be interested in speaking with me? Yes, I do provide coaching services. I do them mainly for partners, but I'm happy to talk to associates as well. And if you contact our office and just ask about that, I'm sure someone there can help you, but I would be happy to talk to you about that. Thank you. Let's see. Let me just hear. Question here. Let's see here. Yeah, and just add all the any questions anyone has, ones, but just keep asking questions. Anything you guys can think of that would be helpful. I'm a 3L at FSU Law, and I'm very interested in working in Washington in the firm, SEC, or DOJ. I'm wondering if it would be worth to do a securities and financial regulation LLM at Georgetown. I'm very interested in corporate and securities law. So the general rule is don't do an LLM. It is taxed in one of 3 schools, but I feel that my case may be an exception. Do you think the addition of an LLM would enable me to crack the DC market? I believe it would help to add Georgetown to the resume, give me access to their placement office, access to alums, help in applying to DC firms living in DC, give me another chance to apply to Fed honors programs, and we'll also be able to do a student internship at the SEC prior to the LLM if I accept it. That's a great question. So the LLM in certain practice areas, I've written about LLMs and said negative things about LLMs. There's certain practice areas, health law and executive ERISA, maybe even securities law, that can be pretty useful. They're expensive, and it's when you're giving up time to do it. And yes, I think that putting a better school on your resume, FSU is not a bad law school, but putting Georgetown on your resume can help to some extent. Law firms know that the LLM programs typically aren't as competitive to get into as the actual legal, the JD programs, but sometimes they are. I think if you really want to do securities work and financial regulation work, I think getting that LLM does show a lot of interest in it. I think that even if you can't get a job in Washington, D.C., then you can get a job in another market. And I would recommend, if you really want to do securities work, I would do every market. And you don't necessarily, and Georgetown has a great career services office, but you could also do what you can to apply to different law firms, around the country on your own. They're not advertising. And you have two things you're talking about here. You're talking about working for the SEC or DOJ, and you're also talking about potentially working in a law firm. So if you want to work in a law firm, the whole country is yours. You can work all over the country. There's also state securities offices where you could work if you want to work all over the country, as well as the federal securities offices. Typically in Washington, D.C. is not like a big center of like corporate law. There's more litigation and regulatory type work there. The corporate work is mainly in New York and the Bay Area, but I do think getting that degree would help you. But at the same time, I don't know if you'd also be interested in being a corporate. If you want to be a corporate securities attorney, which is also called capital markets, you could also try to get a job doing that in a law firm. But you're almost better off having law firm experience and then getting the degree, but it's up to you. But that's a good question. And it's the only thing are the costs and then the opportunity costs of doing it. But I do think it could be helpful. Okay, let's see. Okay, someone wrote a question called, how do you feel about AML as a niche area? And I'm not sure what AML is. So if you could just follow that up and I'll answer that. If you could, re-ask that question. I don't know what AML is. Maybe I do and I'm spaced out, but I don't think I do at the moment. Okay, what are your thoughts about potentials to move from compliance in banks, sanctions and export controls to law firms? Yeah, I think there's a potential for that. I think it's possible. That's a very niche practice area. I think that you could do that. I don't know how many firms have export controls, but there are certain firms that do nothing but international trade. There's some in Washington, D.C. What I like to do when I'm looking for firms sometimes is we have all these databases, and at a BCG, we have like over 100 people like working on our database, doing research and finding all these things so we can get people positions. But at the same time, sometimes you can really find good places just on Google. So if you were to search for, top export control law firms or top international trade law firms, and then you search different cities, and with that search on Google, you'll find places. You could potentially, if you feel like you have a good background on that, then I think you could potentially move. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so there's another question here. The AML, I apologize, is anti-money laundering risk and compliance a niche practice area? Yeah, that's a great niche practice area. So the way to find that is for a lot of the stuff, any of you guys that are doing, and ladies that are doing niche practice areas, if you're in anti-money laundering, risk and compliance or something along those lines, like typically the best way to find those types of practice areas, and let me even see if I can do something here that would be cool. Just give me 1 second. See if I can do this. Just going to do something here real quick. You guys, let's see here. Just give me 1 second. I just have to close my screen to get a new one up. So one of the things that I like to do, and I just want to show you guys this real quickly, laundering, money laundering. So sometimes you can find firms that do this kind of stuff like this way. Here's one, Steptoe and Johnson, that has this practice. Here's one, Holland and Knight, Miller and Chevalier. So if you go down, you can find all these Schutz and Bowen. You can find all these law firms that do that. Typically, if I was you looking for a job, and unfortunately, these people are all my clients, but I'm going to just show you real quickly. You would look at this and you would see, you would go to the law firm, this is an example, and then you would view related professionals and you would contact Gary and you would say, Gary, how you doing? I have experience in this, and would you be interested in talking to me? And so that typically is the best way of doing it. I would probably contact Gary. I don't know, you got Brian is a frequent speaker in banking law. You can go through that, you can do that exercise with each of these firms. And if you do that, it's really going to help you and will help you quite a bit. And so you can find things that way. And then you can also do anti-money law firm. And then you could even go, depending on the market, you can go like Washington, D.C. And Google is just a great tool. There's just so many people. And then you have Gibson Dunn and some of these same firms that we saw before. Then you may even have this guy, Brian DeCluvier, or Baker for this firm, I'm sorry. So you can go through and find places like that. And so that's really a really smart thing for niche attorneys to do, is to look for firms like that in that way, find people that are doing those types of practice areas that way. That can be very helpful. So that's one way I would do that. And you'll find a lot of jobs that way. And if anybody has any other practice areas you'd like me to show them how to do that, would be helpful. Okay, so here's another question. It says, I was a GC at a biotech company. Would that make me a niche candidate for a firm opening in the life sciences and the practice area? And the answer is yes. I don't know what type of biotech company that was specifically, but a way to do that would be like, let's just say it would be the same exercise you could do. You could just say biotech and say you were in Minneapolis, just as an example. Minneapolis. And then you can find firms that do that there. And then there's these best firm lists. There's Biotech Law, BCG Search. You can see a list of firms that we like for that. Probably. So there's BCG Jobs. There's top firms. So there's all sorts of ways to find law firms that do that. And so that's one of the things I would recommend, how I would do that. So yes, but biotech is a GC, and I don't know what type of work you were doing. You could have been doing just very general work, but that can help you as well. Okay, let's see here. Thank you for your practical advice. Offered 6 things to remove from your resume. Let's see, from a legal resume. Refreshingly informative, if not downright entertaining. It struck a chord because they made several errors you identified or struggle with the right message. Considerations, I'm a former entrepreneur and business executive now in law school. My tagline has been, I anticipate advising others on business matters, which I've actually wrestled. Late in my career, I do not expect to work at a big firm, but small Main Street firm, real property, franchise, business contracts, or in-house counsel. I took the risk reward of an online, non-accredited law school. I saved $100,000, so I'll enter the California bar upon completion. While I might suggest anyone who does this on their own is demonstrating diligence and tenacity, traditional attorneys won't care. How can I identify attorneys who might be open to a creative path? That's a great question. There's plenty of attorneys that would be open to a creative path. I don't know having that tagline is important. There's kind of 2 stages of your career as an attorney. So the first is being a soldier, and then the second is being a builder, like a business builder. And so as a soldier coming out of law school, if you do want to work in a law firm, and a small Main Street law firm is fine, you just need to come in and give them the impression that you can be managed, take orders, and do the work. And so that would be my suggestion, is really downplay all the entrepreneurial stuff and just say, this is what you're ready to do. Because anybody that comes out of law school needs to remember, and I made this mistake. So my problem was, and I don't know how I got jobs, honestly, because I had an asphalt business that I was very proud of, and I was independent and all these things. And if I was a law firm, frankly, I wouldn't have hired me, knowing what I know now. And I'm sure I would have gotten more jobs, honestly, if I hadn't been an entrepreneur, because it wasn't people that are independent and so forth. You need to be teachable. You need to show that you can commit and so forth. And the people that are hiring you want to feel like a big deal. They want to give you orders. They want to have kissed their ass, frankly. Sometimes regardless of the size ego of the attorney, they want to feel like you're working really hard for them and doing whatever they say. You're going to be loyal and be able to be managed and all those things. So you just need to be able to take orders, not look like an entrepreneur. The thing about being late in your career, that's okay too, but you need to find someone that will go for that. Typically, you're going to have a better luck with a small law firm or even a solo practitioner. But people late in their career can get jobs with the government. They can get jobs anywhere or in-house. But if it was me, I would get training first. Law firm training is always very good because a law firm will train you in doing work for clients, which requires different types of work many times and a variety of work than you wouldn't get if you were to work for any other type of person. And then in terms of the online, non-accredited law school, that's fine. There's attorneys in all firms over California that didn't go to non-accredited law school. As a general rule, if you're a law student listening to this, I don't know that you should choose a law school based on the cost, but if it's all online and that was more convenient for you, there's nothing wrong with that. So that's what I would recommend. I would recommend applying to small firms. I would recommend applying to places that don't necessarily have openings. I would recommend applying to solo practitioners. And then there's all sorts of government offices around California that you could apply to in small and large towns. I would apply to those. So, the smaller the employer and the more remote they are in terms of their location, the easier they are to get jobs with. I'll tell you a funny story. Years ago, I got a call from maybe 2 years ago, of a guy that was practicing somewhere in the desert. When I say the desert, I'm talking about not like Palm Springs, but somewhere 75 miles or 100 miles from, the nearest courthouse, but he was in a small town and he was begging for me to find someone to come take over his practice. And he was generating, in terms of profits, I don't know, $150,000, $60,000 a year, working in a very small town or community. And so and the smaller the market, the more demand there's going to be for you wherever you are. So that's just something to think about. And if anybody has any other questions, I'll answer them too, but I'm still going through these. But just any follow-up questions anyone has, or would you like me to answer, I'm happy to. I started working in the U.S. Department of Justice Tax Division through the honors program in 2004. 2007, I moved to a field office in Dallas, Texas, doing the same work. I've been promoted several times, received multiple outstanding attorney awards, and only work on cases with millions of dollars at stake. I assume at my age and years of experience in the government made me unattractive big law firms. However, I feel that's the next step in my career development. What do you think I should do to make the move to the law firm? Okay, that's a good question. Being as many years out as you have been is not a bad thing. I do think that you could get a job in a law firm if you wanted to. I think that the problem is most law firms bring people in when they're young, and then they either make it and sink or swim in the first 7 to 8 years. So coming in with that many years under your belt does make you somewhat unattractive. I don't know what type of litigation you've been doing, whether it's tax controversy or what it is, but I do think that there are plenty of law firms, especially law firms that have tax specialties that are specialists in tax that would be interested in you. So I don't really see any reason why you couldn't get hired in a law firm. What I would say, though, that would concern me is being in the government for as long as you've been and knowing what you make if you've been out that long, and is actually a good thing. And the problem with going to a law firm is a law firm, you're going to be dependent on having the work, and they may not have the work, and you may not like a law firm for all the reasons that I listed. And that to me would make it much more difficult and much more likely that you're going to have that may not be a good decision for you to go back to a law firm. So if it was me personally, I don't know, that I would want to go back to or work in a law firm. I would probably try to, stick it out, work as long as I could, but that would be my advice. But if you do want to go to a law firm, there are going to be plenty of law firms, especially law firms with nothing but tax practices that are boutique firms that do tax litigation. So again, the way to find that would just be tax litigation law firm, Dallas, if you want to stay in Dallas. So Scamahorn, that's a good one. That's funny. But these are IRS type attorneys. I don't know that you would be doing, I don't know what kind of tax you do, whether it's criminal tax law or what type of litigation you do. You could do, I don't know. But, for example, if it was tax resolution, litigation, Dallas, tax, then you would get these firms. And then if you wanted to do, I don't know, what tax fraud, litigation, Dallas, you could find firms this way. It looks to me like whoever Brown Tax is, they may be the one that does a lot of this. And then you have some big firms here, David Gare and this particular guy. If I was doing what you're doing, I would start contacting some of these people and ask them. You're not going to find most of these jobs, especially in a niche practice area like that. You're not going to find most of these jobs on job sites. You're going to have to, or even through recruiters, you're going to have to kind of network your way into a lot of the stuff, and by contacting these people and not just sending a resume, but saying, I want to have an informational interview with you or talk to you. Do you have a few minutes? This is my background. I really appreciate I know you have a lot of experience and so forth. And that would be the way that I would approach that. Okay, let's see here. Okay, here's another one that says, I read your article on the top 10 tips for passing the bar the second time. I want to know if you recommend working prior to the February bar exam. For me, I think that not working prior to the July exam worked to my disadvantage as a former night student. I was uncomfortable with working during the day, attending class at night, and staying on weekends. Having so much time off negatively affected my performance. I was uncomfortable with working during the day. I was comfortable with working day, attending class at night, staying on weekends. Yeah, so if it was me, I would give yourself 2 months to study for the exam. I think that, I don't know if you're talking about the California exam or which one. Most people that don't pass the California exam, you need to study for the California exam probably about 5 to 6 weeks. consistently or maybe even longer. Lots of people fail the bar exam. There's nothing wrong with failing the bar exam, but I would recommend giving yourself uninterrupted time to study. Then you just getting all the help you can while studying would be my advice. I do think you need uninterrupted time off to study for the exam. It's just a lot of work to study for something and have to do it again, and just a nightmare. It's the kind of thing that that you just don't want to have to repeat just because it's unpleasant. It's just a lot of memorization. So if it was me, I don't think you need to study months at a time because you're going to get bored and you want to concentrate everything in. But I would, definitely try to give yourself 5 to 6 weeks of uninterrupted study where that's all you do and you make that your full-time job. You do everything you can and get as much input and stuff as you can. Okay, let's see. I'm 49 and spent most of my career as internationally recognized scientist in the areas of genomics and bioinformatics. In 2005, I decided to pursue a law degree while holding my faculty position at Duke Medical School. Wow. There was only one part-time law school within 250 miles, and that was NCCU, not exactly a tier 14. My goal was to combine my reputation in science along with the law. I actually wrote some ABA best-selling books on the topic. Wow. I'm also running a solo practice in North Carolina, and as such, have tried a lot of disciplines until recently. Let's see, until I landed on patents and a lot of disciplines, patents and some federal litigation. I've just been admitted to the Maryland bar and have been dying mother in the area. Here's my problem. Law firms won't take me seriously. They look at my school, even though I was magna cum laude, managing the law review, in the same way the biotech industry sees a JD and a PhD and runs some lawyers. I can't really take the practice law of resume where it looks like I've been unemployed for a few years. What do I do? I'm assuming that you want to stay in practicing law. My advice would be to be in patent law. I don't know, regardless of the law school you went to, it doesn't really matter if you're a patent attorney. I don't know that patent litigation and so forth the problem with the law firms is if you have all the scientific background, they're going to look at you more as a patent attorney, and they're going to be able to really justify using you. I'm surprised you're not a patent attorney. Having a PhD is a very good thing as a patent attorney, and especially in your practice area and working on all the things you do. It actually would fit in perfectly with what you do. Maryland and DC is also a very big area for patent related work in the biotech industry. The biggest ones by the way, are Boston and the Bay Area, California. There's some work in Minnesota, and those are big areas. But if it was me, I would recommend that you really do whatever you can to take the patent bar and get into that. I don't know if you have the patent bar, it looks like you do, but I would concentrate on that. If you can't get a job with a major firm, I wouldn't worry about that. There's plenty of smaller solo practitioners and small law firms that you could work for in DC. So here's another example. You would just go and you could look at biotech patent prosecution. I hate to keep using this, but this isn't how I find jobs, but I've noticed that you can find a lot of positions as a biotech prosecution in Washington, D.C. Or how about, let's just do what? Well, you want to do Maryland, so we could do Bethesda, I don't know. If you do this, you'll start getting lots of places this way, and you can find interesting places, and you can do it that way. You can go biotech patent prosecution, Baltimore, and you're going to find lots of different things. Womble, Offutt Kerman, this particular guy. And then the farther down you go, the more firms you're going to find. So once you get into like page 5, you'll start finding lots of smaller firms and so forth where you potentially could work. That would be how I would address that. I would do whatever I could to track down the firms that do it. I would try to find solo practitioners and smaller people. Your degree is very valuable, and 49 is not old at all. People do this until they're in their 80s. I don't really think you have anything to worry about in terms of your age. Okay, let's see here. Okay, I am in an extremely difficult situation. I went to law school later in my 30s and went to night school while holding down a career. I then passed the Illinois bar and began working in an insurance defense law firm. This went great for several years, but the firm fell in hard times and laid off several associates such as me. I then worked elsewhere until another small firm picked me up in an attempt to get its insurance defense business going. For almost 3 years, this worked well, but then the firm lost business, and once again, I was a downsized victim. Now I feel there is no hope for a legal career. I have taken a job in liability claims for an insurance company, which I hate. I thought that I made a mistake going to law school despite being the top of my class, meaning I'm not dumb. I get recommendations for everywhere I have been too. I can't stir up any interest from firms. I'm miserable about this. I'm a very hard worker with great reviews. Is there anything I can do? Yes, you can continue applying to firms. There's nothing wrong with doing insurance defense. It's a huge practice area. There's a lot of demand for it. You have the ability to build up a book of business. You don't need to be working for an insurance company if you don't want to. There's lots and lots of firms out there that you could get a job with. You just have to continue pounding the ground. If you have great reviews, you can attach those reviews sometimes to your application of reviews. You can keep applying. You should be applying to every firm that does insurance defense in your area. And if not, just throughout whatever state you're in. You just shouldn't give up. You shouldn't feel bad about having a difficult time with a position. You should always just keep going. And that's the thing that really upsets me, is when people don't keep pushing. If you were in a law firm for 3 years, you obviously do very good work. So there's no reason that there's no reason to worry about any of this. So that would be my advice. Is there's also a presentation in OR, I believe, that talks about how to get a job outside a law firm. And so I would also run in a law firm and different ways to look for that. And I would watch that if you have time. Thanks. Okay, let's see here. Final question, I think. So if anybody doesn't have any more, I hope you do have more questions. The more questions you have, I'm happy to answer them. That's it. I'll end the call. So let's see. Last question is, I read your article. Is an LLM degree worth it? And agree with pretty much everything you said. However, I'm wondering if there's an exception to my situation. Would appreciate any advice you're willing to share. Long story short, I'm a staff attorney at a mid-sized antitrust firm. That's good. I've been applying to antitrust associate jobs for the past 6 months on my own. I've also worked with a few recruiters, but haven't had any interviews. The recruiter said it's partly because I'm currently a staff attorney, not an associate, and partly because I did not graduate from a top law school. I graduated from Brooklyn Law, in 2014. Having 2 years of antitrust experience and a background in economics, I thought I'd be a good candidate for many of the junior antitrust associate positions I've applied. Do you think an LLM in antitrust law from NYU would make a difference? I would appreciate any advice and referral to a recruiter might be able to help me find antitrust positions. But yeah, I don't think an LLM in antitrust would hurt you. I think it could be a very good thing. The problem with antitrust is it's like very cerebral, and a lot of people that do it are very cerebral and smart and that sort of thing. And Brooklyn's not a bad law school. I think it's a great law school. So I don't know why. But the fact that you're a staff attorney, my advice would be, if it's possible, is really try to get into a permanent role where you're at. And then your resume would just reflect you're an associate. It would make it much easier. The other thing about antitrust is it's a very difficult practice area to get into. It's difficult to get into the defense side, and it's difficult, but it's not as difficult to get into the plaintiff side. So maybe you would be better off looking for law firms that do plaintiffs-related antitrust work. Those salaries aren't going to be as high, but that would be my advice about how to do that. So if you can work at plaintiffs antitrust firms, it's going to be a lot easier. The problem with defense antitrust firms is, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the firms hiring people, and you also have to put yourself in the shoes of the companies hiring people, is they want people that look, really freaking smart on paper. Because if there's antitrust issues in a law firm, in a company, that company can't afford to lose. And so they're going to want really smart people. So I think you need to maybe think about that, to the extent that, is that a practice area you want to be in? And I'll tell you that I'm smart, but some of the people that I've seen that are really do the defense with the biggest firms are really smart. I'm not saying that you have to be smart to practice antitrust law. You certainly don't, but you're a genius to practice antitrust law. You need to be smart. But I think that you have to realize that I have a very difficult time many times placing antitrust attorneys that are even with major firms and doing very well. So it's going to be even more difficult for you as a staff attorney. And as a general rule, there are just not a lot of antitrust openings. So I would think that the best place for you to try to find something would be with someone doing the plaintiffs related work. That would be my advice, or work in a smaller market. If you're really interested in antitrust law, having a degree from NYU and that would help, but it's going to be expensive is my only thing. It'll be up to you. Okay, let's see. Okay, the final question, and if anyone doesn't have any more questions, just let me know, but I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. I read your column with interest, as you've done a great job in explaining the notoriously convoluted area. I'm an Australian lawyer who recently transferred from to Ohio to work in-house. Okay, my preliminary investigations indicate I would need to do 2 years of study in Ohio law school to be eligible to take the bar here. It would require less of a study load for me to take the New York bar, but for personal and professional reasons, I would not relocate to New York. My question is whether there are residency requirements to take the bar in a particular state. So in order to take the bar in New York or some other more beneficial location, do I need to be living there? Is it sufficient to take the exam by satisfying the eligibility requirements of the bar, knowing that I could be doing legal counsel work in any state in the US? I do not know the answer to that. I apologize. I don't think you have to be a resident of Ohio, New York to take the bar there, though. I don't think that. And then once you do get the bar, then you can easily serve as in-house counsel and usually get waivers from the state and so forth if you have it in one state. I know, like, for example, if you took the New York bar and you wanted to work in California in-house, you certainly could do that, and that wouldn't be a problem. But yeah, sorry. All right, thank you. And I will talk to everyone next week, and I appreciate you being on the call today. And thank you for all the excellent questions. Any questions you have next week, feel free to ask them. And what is helpful, all this learning you guys are doing, you're very far ahead of most people because most attorneys do not understand or law students the answers to this kind of stuff. So I appreciate it. Thank you.